when he first did his recordings, he carried into the field a giant reel-to-reel recorder, hid in the bushes, and then turned on the recorder if he heard a frog. Fortunately, we don't have to do that anymore. Is this what? Didn't I turn it on? Oh, yeah, a bit closer. Bit closer. Yes, as David alluded, I'm actually an enthusiastic amateur about frogs. So if I say anything tonight that's completely wrong, forgive me. Brendan is the real expert on frogs, and the work that we're going to talk about tonight mostly comes from his PhD thesis. But when he had a look at what I was going to say, he said, I should say right up front the answer to the question, do the growlers call underwater? And the answer is very definitely yes. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any point doing a talk, would there? I didn't change that. There's only one T in the Tory. I'm not very good on botanic names as the amateur. I much prefer the descriptive names. And I think Growling Grass Frog is the best descriptive name. When you hear its call, you'll agree with it. In fact, this is about the only one of the botanic names that I actually remember. And hence the name growler. These are a couple of the alternative names. Southern bell frog I've heard used a bit. I don't think it's as nice as the growling grass frog. There's been a decline in growling grass frogs. For example, around La Trobe University, in the great wetland system they have, there hasn't been a growler heard there since I think probably the early 2000s days. Well, before that. Even before that. We've done recordings in that area, and I've been through there with David. But interestingly, over Plenty Road, in the golf course, there's a pond there that we've been with David and seen the growling grass frog. So just over the road, curious. But we think the decline is due both to loss of habitat. A lot of their common areas, for instance, along the Merry Creek, are susceptible to development, and the chytrid fungus. That image there is probably not a growler, but it was the most gruesome one I could find of the effect of chytrid fungus. But it is pretty bad, and the growler is particularly susceptible to it. It is pretty much distributed through Victoria, except in the pointy end of Victoria in East Gippsland. It's just a bit of a summary of the chytrid. It gets into the skin and it affects the skin, producing disfigurement. They usually die, take a while to die, but then the spores can be released and infect other frogs. A few things about it. I should say, before I go any further, give a plug to Nick's book. A lot of the information I'm talking about came out of this book. That he made the statement, and there's one that Brendan and I agree with, about doubts about the strategy of relocation. The thing is that frogs can move between locations up to a couple of kilometres, and it's interesting. I'll talk about it on the next slide. But ones that are relocated don't seem to settle down very well, and a number of these highlights were taken out of a paper that looked at it and pointed out some of the issues located with translocation. I understand is a better term than relocation. There are some breeding programs going on. Winton Wetlands, which is just north of Benalla, I think it is. They've got a breeding program there. They actually relocated frogs from a storage facility near Bendigo. And MSA are creating a number of breeding wetlands in likely locations, part of the Melbourne Strategic Assessment. Colleague at work is involved in this, and I asked her, are they actually moving the frogs? And she said she asked one of her colleagues that works in this program, and she said no, they're relying on the frogs moving into these locations, they're setting them up. Do you know any more about that, Nick?
Well, we have the person who's overseeing the program in Taffy there, but yeah, so we had a technical advisory group that I was on and a few others that Kathy ran, and it was based off Jeff Hughes. Mike's working meta population modelling, and we used that to kind of design what we hope will be effective habitats for the frogs, but no, I think we're actively dropping frogs in there. We're hoping to sort of safeguard the ones that are already there. And
hoping that others will move in.
Yeah, that's right. If some of our efforts are in areas where the local populations become extinct and there is no other population that might be able to recolonise or colonise a new wetland, I reckon one of these days we're going to have to face that prospect. And but in our work back then, what we did, that technical advisory group did recommend that if it ever came to that, it would have to be a proper science-based study, not just recommend. Hope for the best.
Were Melbourne Zoo doing a breeding program of growlers?
Not in recent history, no.
Yeah, wasn't sure. Couple of things I noticed when I was doing some research. One was this property in Sunbury where the owner was complaining that he wasn't allowed to do any put down fertiliser or develop paddocks or whatever because they were supposed to be growling grass frog habitats. And even more dramatically, this claim that the growler has cost $2.6 billion because there are large areas that are supposed to be growling grass frog habitats that they won't allow development on. I don't know, as a personal opinion, I found this curious because I wouldn't think you've got to conserve a whole big area as long as there were sites within that area, like wetlands where the frogs could live, and corridors or ways they could move between the areas. So you wouldn't have to, you wouldn't have to zone off a whole very large area. That's just my. I'd be interested to hear other people's opinion on that one, but yeah, it makes for dramatic headlines anyway. This is something we don't think they've been photographed before. This was the egg mass of the growling grass frog that we photographed out at a pond near O'Hearns Road in Craigieburn. And this was an interesting one because it was a pond, we knew the growlers were there, we set up recorders, we recorded them, then Brendan went back and the thing had been completely bulldozed. Someone decided that that was a way to develop it or something, but no consultation, nothing. And to say, we don't know if we don't think the growlers have come back, but that egg mass we photographed there. The bottom photo probably isn't growling grass frog, but just gives you an idea what the egg masses look like when they come together. But the one we saw, it's a bit hard to see in the photograph because it's sort of embedded in the, particularly on the right, into the grass. But that's it. The egg mass can sit on the surface and then clump together, and sometimes stick because it's very sticky. Sometimes stick to vegetation. And the growler even has a golf course named after it. I talked to the people there, and as far as I'm aware, there are no growlers there, and I'm not sure if there ever have been or why on earth they called it that, but everybody's heard of the Growling Grass Golf Course. And in fact, someone I was talking to about this told me there's a Growling Grass wine. Couldn't find any record of it, but who knows? Now, our work's being done with what we call bioacoustic recording, which is a nice fancy way of talking about just plain out recorders. The size of them is about about an A4 footprint. Usually we attach them to trees or posts near to the edge of water. It's the sound recorders made by Wildlife Acoustics. You can program them to record periodically. We've used 15 minutes and 10 minutes per hour. Only reason we do it that way is you get a lot of files, gigabytes of files, and basically you have to listen to them. We use a Kaleidoscope software to look at it. Kaleidoscope does have the cluster function, but we found that unreliable. You're likely to miss important calls, particularly if you're looking for a rare species. So you use the software to sort of scan through the waveforms. If you see something that looks promising, then you listen to it. But the only way you can be sure it's frog X, like we were with the giant burrowing frog, is to actually listen to it. But Brendan did have to go through a lot of files. We literally have gigabytes of them. We're limited only by how long the batteries last and how big an SD card is. We typically use 32 gig ones. Oh, I should say too, if anyone, we now have a stock of these. If anyone's doing any work in the field and wants to borrow one, let me know. You're quite willing to borrow it. Come on. Just to say a little bit about our findings before we go on to look at the underwater work. We mainly worked along the Merry Creek corridor out of Craigieburn. We found a couple of particularly important, significant observations. One is that, at least in that corridor, we can't guarantee that this applies everywhere else, we had gigabytes of calls, and there were absolutely none except between the start of October and the end of January. We had absolutely zip outside that window. So if you were trying to record the growler in winter, you're out of luck. The second one was that the peak calling time was between, although we had calls all through the day, the peak calling time was between 2 and 6 in the morning, which is perhaps why not so many people have heard them. And the worst time was round about sunset. Now, sort of the conventional wisdom about recording frogs is you go out at sunset and record them. But in this case here, it wouldn't be the best strategy. That just shows you the bit of the calling. I have only included, it starts from the end of September through to the start of February. We didn't include any further because it's black. And what you're just getting is time of day and on the y-axis and date on the x-axis. And these are three of the above water calls. This is using Raven Pro software to look at the calls. There's the fast, the growl, and the grunt. Fast and growl are called advertisement calls, and the grunt is called territorial. Although there's some dispute about the name of advertisement. I can't remember. Do you remember what the other name people are using, Nick? It starts with R.
Murray's always used advertisement call.
Yeah. When we submitted this work for publication, the reviewers suggested it was called release mod, not be release.
Mating? Mating? Or...
No, it started with R. I think it was release. Why release, I'm not quite sure. But he claimed that people started disputing the advertisement classification. But most of the work we've read uses those three terms. And just a little bit about breathing, because we're looking at frogs underwater. But frogs can actually take in oxygen through their skin is the main thing to get out of this. So it just helps them to stay underwater for a lot longer, not indefinitely. Now, looking on a global scale, sorry all the detail in this, but I just grabbed a few reports of frogs calling overseas. There's not many examples. It's very sparsely recorded. The understanding is it's to do with reproductive or territorial behaviour. Just a couple of examples. The northern red-legged frog had been recorded both above and underwater. It's a Californian frog, and there was a couple of species on the Tibetan plateau that had been recorded as working underwater. Be a nice environment to do frog work. So that aquatic species that call while partly submerged can potentially propagate calls above and below the water. And we think the calls emitted underwater are not received above water because of difference in sound pressures, and the sound doesn't transmit well from underwater to above the water. And we'll see this when we talk about our recording. And as I said, frogs that call while floating may potentially use both pathways. I like to see, hopefully this will work. It's not, yeah. If you want to have a look. I just pull something out. But particularly the second part of the video shows quite well the frog swimming underwater. It isn't a local frog. I like that from swimming up towards the camera. Okay. What did I pull out? It's still working, I think. Sorry, I better stop this. Where are you? Where's okay. Come on. So what we used to sorry, what we used to do our underwater recording was a hydrophone, something like this one. It's also made by can't remember the name of the company now. The Wildlife Acoustics. That's right. They've mainly been developed to record whales and dolphins. There's not much underwater been recording of other species. And what we did was we connected it with a song meter. So we had the song meter above the ground and the hydrophone under the surface. And we made sure with a floating device that the hydrophone stayed suspended. Did a fair bit of experimenting with swimming pools to see whether we put the hydrophone under the water and had sounds above the water that they'd be recorded thinking they were underwater, and they weren't. And we'll also see evidence that the underwater and the above water calling is quite separate. What's it doing to me? Come on, come on. This is our location of the two that we tested. This was an area where we did our earlier work on the Growling Grass Frog. Site one was an old quarry. I think you'd know the quarry that you can come into it from the landfill entrance, and you drive down and you go down into it. It's an old basalt quarry where they used to dig up bluestone. There's another one not out at South Morang that we've done work with called Mother-in-Law's Leap, which I think is a great name for a wetland. But yeah, it's a quarry that we knew the Growling Grass Frog was there, and site two was along the Merry Creek, just off the Hume Highway. Oh, gee. This is really starting to bug me. I don't know why it's not going on to this one. I all got upset because I used that video.
The keys, if you use the arrow key.
Now the arrows, when in doubt, I'll close the whole program down. Sorry.
Who's the second one now?
That was some of the examples of the frogs.
Skip that one. That's the end.
Oh yeah, put it down to this one.
Jeff, they can set it back up again without causing too much trouble, hopefully. Hang on, I'll cover it.
I should be able to just do it from current slide.
Well, maybe. Yeah, from currents.
Yeah. Okay, so this was the setup we had. H1 is the hydrophone. It was balanced in the water with a floating device so that it would stay submerged, and as close as we can get it was the actual sonde recorder, so we can get above ground calls. Yeah, these are the actual underwater calls that were recorded. Again, we could distinguish three different calls, which look some similarities to the above ground call. We've got good evidence that it is different. These are the types of calls, the number of call notes, just a bit of description of the structure of the waveforms. the length of the calls. And I think this is an important one because it shows the peak intensity of the waveforms. And the filled-in stars are under the surface and the open circles are above the surface. And another important point is at Site 2 we recorded no above-surface calls. So those calls were only being made under the water. So we're not hearing above-water calls under the water. I think that's an important distinction to make. This is just also demonstrated in the box plot about the peak call frequency. And interestingly, under the water, the peak frequency remains pretty constant. Above the water, there's a lot more variation. This is just a distribution of the types of calls, mostly advertisement calls. The parentheses are the total number of calls recorded, and we break it up. And as I say, the total above water territorial calls were at that second site where there was 0 above water. So to finish up with, I thought we should, I'm not sure how well this will come over, but see if we can hear them. I'm sorry, they're not very loud. Maybe if you want to come up after and hear them and compare them to the above ground. What's interesting in the above ground, Brendan sent me a whole lot of files. Now, I started listening to them without taking any notice of what he told me about them. And I thought, that's the pole ball. What's it doing under the water? He said, no, that's above ground. So we do have actual files, but they're pretty soft. So I just want to finish up with one more slide. If I can get it to, I'm sure there. No, that's not good. Yeah. Oh, no, come on, what are you doing? This is just some work, that's Brendan there, by the way. This was some earlier work he'd done recording the GBF when he was working for the, working with a group that were opposing the Fingerboards mineral sands mining project in East Gippsland. And the group thought that this frog was there, but the trouble is, and one of our favourite bugbears is that so much work done in environmental consulting, people will go to a site and they'll say, no, we can't hear that frog, it's not here. And they may be there for 5 or 10 minutes, but they make conclusions on that. As we saw from the Growling Grass Frog, its peak is in the middle, early morning. And unless you do things like systematic recording, you can't really make definitive statements about whether a frog is there or not. It just happens to be pure luck if you go there and you can hear it. As I say, when all the sites that I went to along the Merry Creek, I never heard the growler. But as soon as we put out recorders, we had heaps of recordings of them. Now, he's made some recent GBF recordings, and if this works, probably I don't. The trouble is the internet doesn't come up on the projector. But he recorded them in. If you want to hear them, the Giant Burrowing Frog has a very soft call, which is one of the problems in detecting it. And one, we were when we first heard it on our recording, we thought, is that really there? And you go back and listen to it a few times and look at its waveform, and you say, definitely. But the giant burrowing frog is a lot more common north of the border. We think it's a different species, but the number of recordings south of the border are very few. And most of the work, the reliable reports, is by a guy, Roger Bilmy, and he was advising Brendan where to look. Brendan's been looking for this frog for years. He calls it the ghost frog because it's so hard to find. But he did record 3 of them just south of Eden, but just south of the border. But we do definitely think it is the Victorian GBF. But that's just sort of updating on some recent work that he's done. Okay, I think I've said enough. I'll stop there.